Oh my God. Oh my God. Hello? Check, check. Dr. Chisholm.
How are you, sir?
Good, man. How's it going?
Going pretty good. Going pretty good. The morning sessions have been really fantastic. Things are going pretty smoothly, so I can't ask for a better Monday.
Oh my goodness. Why'd you tell me that, Sean, right before I present?
Oh no, 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 no!
A
You'll be
lot
fine,
of
brother.
pressure.
You'll be fine. So I'm here. I'll just keep myself sort of muted, but I'm back
Okay.
here. And so if you need someone to filter questions in your chat box, I'm happy to do that. I can kind of see 'em. I'm not sure how visible it is to you if you go full screen, but either way, I'm here to answer to you know filter questions if you need me to. If not, I'll just kind of keep an eye on any technical glitches and all that stuff, and kind of keep you rolling.
Okay. And Sean, how do I look right now? Am I looking straight at, because I have them on two different screens. This is like I'm looking at the camera.
So right now, you're looking right directly at the camera right now.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. That's what our
Yeah.
presentation is then. And so I see the chat box over here on the side. Is that where the
Uh huh.
questions will just pop up? So if I turn my head, I can see them, correct?
Right.
Okay. Got it.
So I'm just gonna do a test here, and I'll just say, let's see, tell me what you see on your end.
I see good morning.
Okay, all right.
Got it. And so when people type questions into the chat box, I can, because I'm going to ask a couple of questions within my presentation. And so I can turn
Yes,
my head and just see them answer them just on the spot, kind of.
that's right.
Okay. Well, good. I guess we're good. We're rocking and rolling then, man.
We are. I'm excited about it
Well, I'm excited too. Thank you, Sean.
for sure.
Okay, it is 12:45, and I guess it is okay, Sean, if I go ahead and get started. I don't know if you want me to give it a few minutes or.
Absolutely. We're on time. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. I'm Quincy Jenkins. I am the new Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Chat State. I've been in this role now since May 1st, and so I am now happy to present to each and every one of you. I can't see any of you, so if you have any questions, there'll be a couple of times throughout the presentation where I'll just ask for your thoughts to gauge where we are. And so if you don't mind, please respond in the chat box. And if you see me look away, I am looking at your messages. So the presentation today is Diversity as a Prism. And we are going to be focusing on fostering a welcoming campus culture, in particular for LGBTQ plus stakeholders. But these practices can apply to anyone within a campus environment. So if you have any questions after the presentations, please feel free to email me. So to get started, I always like to just make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to understanding the frameworks when we talk about diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion, and what they all mean. So first, I just kind of want to get your ideas and feedback of how do each of you define diversity? Who in this picture is diverse? Is there diversity in this picture? And what does that mean? If you could respond in the chat box, that would be great. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And Quincy, just as a reminder, we're probably about a 20-second delay on some of this. So if the responses come in a little bit late, that's probably why.
Thank you, Sean.
For sure.
And when you get a chance, I know that we're on a delay now. Everyone in the picture's diverse, diversity. That's right, Reed Allison. There are many different definitions of diversity. That's right. I see Dr. Ashford responded. And so these are all great observations. And so the answer is everyone's diverse in many different ways. And so when we talk about diversity, it really depends in what context we're talking about it. Um, and so, for example, diversity really is just talking about differences within the same space. When I was in Atlanta as a young man, going to some bars, and there was a particular gay bar named Bulldogs that we go to, and it was almost overwhelmingly African American male clientele. My identity as a black gay man in that context wasn't as salient um, in Bulldogs until someone from another ethnic background showed up in the space. And so when we talk about diversity, we really have to be careful and choose which context we're talking about. Diversity really is just a counting of identities. I'm this age, I am this tall, this is my ethnicity, this is my political affiliation, this is how I view myself, this is my socioeconomic status, and all of those are all dynamic. And so diversity can be both mutable, which means that it can change over time. If you are born into a poor family and you succeed in life and become successful, especially financially, then that's no longer part of your identity. That is a moving characteristic. And immutable is how we think of race, especially as we conceptualize it in American society. I'm African American. Um, you know, Within the current context, that's not going to change. And so that's an immutable characteristic of diversity. So gender identity, which we'll get to in a few, sex, the organs we were born with, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, race, age, ability. So we can see that when we talk about diversity, the conversation can get quite complex pretty quickly. So it's always a good rule of thumb. We say diversity to be very explicit about what we mean and how we define it then. And our identities are formed in relation to our context. My growing up was really how I think about myself was formed by growing up in West Georgia. If I was born in New York, my identity, my relationship with my identities would be quite different. So we have to always remember that diversity can't be separated from the context for which we find ourselves in. That brings us to the notion of equality. So equality really involves the application of rules broadly and consistently. So equality really aims from sameness. We are treated fairly, regardless of our background. The application of the law applies to all of us, or it should apply to all of us equally. And it really is the hallmark of our political philosophy in this country. All men are created equal, which has now been expanded to women, of course. So equality is rooted in our concept of justice. And equality is different from equity because equity really involves creating access to be able to achieve equality. So a good example for equity are free and reduced lunch programs where low-income students get access to food on campus or in school systems. And equity has to take into account our reality outside the immediate space. If we have two students from the inner city who come to our college campus, we also have two other students who receive the private education. What do those students need to be able to be treated fairly? We know that maybe the students from a low-income background, rural background, didn't have the same resources. So therefore, they may need more resources. So with equity, we have to be okay with giving some people more to fill some gaps. Another example of this is the celebration of this year of the American with Disabilities Act, which really provided an equitable environment for those with disabilities. So for many years, generations, if you had a wheelchair, you were really prohibited from accessing jobs, the workplace, shopping malls. So the American with Disability Act provided ramps on buildings so people in wheelchairs could attend job interviews and get jobs and get themselves out of poverty. That was an equitable act. Another one would be the Pell Grant. We give low-income students and rural students students more money oftentimes, so that way they can access college. It doesn't mean that we are disparaging students of means. It just means that these students need more help. That's an equity-minded type of lens. There's racial equity, there's income equity, there's gender equity. So even within equity, we have to be very clear what type of lens we're using when we are using equity-mindedness. And equity requires resources and agility. We have to be able to pivot. I know that's hard for us a lot of times in the higher ed environment, but it's necessary if we're going to innovate and be able to serve the student population that we need to serve, who needs us most. And so that brings me to inclusion. And inclusion is a quite different concept. Inclusion really is not just being in the room at the table, but rather having a voice. We know that slave plantations were very diverse, but they weren't inclusive. So just because we have compositional diversity doesn't mean that inclusion is present. So inclusion is the integration of equitable practices. In this case, so today we're talking about the LGBTQ plus population, preferred names. We all know plenty of people whose first names are Mary, but they go by Beth. And so it really isn't a stretch to extend that to everyone, on campus, our employees, our staff, and our students, to address them in a way that makes them feel comfortable and included within space. Remote work policies for our single parents, especially our single mothers. There's a lot of research coming out now that shows that women in particular have been really affected by the pandemic, especially women of color, and especially women of color with children. And so when we talk about inclusive practices, we have to make sure that equity is present, and we are looking at our policies to remove barriers to success. And the biggest takeaway from inclusion is the ability to belong as oneself. In February 2017, the military versed its ban on African-American hairstyles, allowing more African-American women to wear braids, dreads, to serve in the military. It was an anti-inclusive practice, but this provided more access to be yourself in a sane space. So I know we have a 20-minute delay. I'm sorry, I'll read some chats. Diversity, that's right, Charlotte. And Charlotte's just talking about intersectionality, so that was a very timely response. So what is intersectionality? And we'll take a couple of seconds to answer that in the chat. That's right, Tia. You can always see someone's diversity. We'll get to that in just a few. All those unknown identities, which are just as important. And while we're typing, a feeling, that's right. And while we're typing, just kind of notice this picture and what are some things that stand out to you, that's salient to you in this particular photo? What speaks to the power of intersectionality in this particular photo? That's right, Lisa. I like the immigrant status. Yes, that's a very big part of intersectionality. That multiculturalism. So in this particular photo, we noticed that, especially here in Tennessee, when we talk about identities, especially those within the LGBTQ plus lens, it's going to intersect with rural identities as well, oftentimes, low income. It's just an added identity. Does it mean that someone is different from us? Does that make them more or less? Well, not necessarily. So intersectionality really is how all of our identities interact and affect each other. I grew up in a middle upper class environment. Both of my parents were college professors. Um, and so while I may not have had racial privilege growing up, I certainly had economic privilege. What does that intersection mean? What does it mean to be a Black gay man? Well, it's his own thing. Both of those identities interact with each other, and those can change over time. And so we can't talk about diversity with also leaving out intersectionality, the power of intersectionality. Which identities at a particular point are more salient, which ones have more influence in our lives. Gay, oh, that's right, biker, patriotic. So a good way to really think about diversity, especially through the analogy of a prism, is here on this end, we have our common humanity, the same light that goes through all of us. It's the universality that we all share. The prism is really symbolic of ourselves, how we think of ourselves, our self-awareness. Uh, what does it mean to be an Asian American woman in Utah who maybe has a disability, who may be queer? What does that mean? And so that's our self-awareness. And then once we have, on the other side of that, we have this kind of beautiful display of light. And that's our identity expression. That's how our identity is expressed to the world. And so for this particular presentation, we're going to talk about lesbian, which is the L, gay, which is B, which is bisexual, T for transgender, and Q for queer. Lesbian, I'm pretty sure most of us are familiar with that term, when women are attracted to other women, put plainly. Gay mostly refers to men, male same-sex attraction, although there are plenty of women who identify as gay as well. So that term is quite transient. Bisexual, being attracted to both genders, both sexes, regardless of your sex. Transgender, which we'll get to in just a few, really involves your sex not identifying with your gender identity. And queer, which for so long, or questioning now, for so long was used as a pejorative for many in the gay community, but has since seen a renaissance of sorts in its usage. So one important aspect about the LGBT community that we all must recognize, because many of our identities are unseen, they're not as salient, which speaks to the whole in the closet phenomenon, is language. Language in our community is power. It is very important because it really defines our relationship to the broader social context. So queer is really defined as an historically derogatory word, and sometimes can be when it's used in a hurtful way. But it's since been reclaimed by many in our community for its ability to be an umbrella term. The term means different things, different people. It's very personal, but it generally refers to sexual and gender identities, other than an outside of the heteronormative experience. Cisgender means that your gender identity aligns with the one you were assigned at birth. So although gay men are attracted to other men, they're still cisgendered men. Their gender identity matches with their the ones that they were born with. Transgender, and trans means to move from Greek, means you experience and express gender that does not match the one you were assigned at birth. Gender nonconforming means that a person identifies as neither a man or a woman, so those gender concepts aren't relevant in the situation. And many non-conforming people use they, them pronouns. And as colleges, higher education aims to become more diverse and more inclusive, this is important because with inclusiveness, we have to make space for other people, other experiences in the work environment. A good way to breach the conversation could be saying, hey, my name is Quincy. My pronouns are he, him. Recent NASPA conferences, we see that all the time now in higher ed, where you have the name tag to your pronouns. Well, that's what that's for. It really is just taking away the assumption. I'm assuming that you identify as a man or woman. This is what I think. So it has really nothing to do with me. It's just opening up space, saying, hey, I'm not assuming. And, to show that I'm just being explicit in my pronouns, and I would like for you to do the same. Now, there are some other terms that you may hear: genderqueer, gender fluid, genderless, non-binary. And if you're unsure, you can always just ask someone how they identify. Now, to ask you another question, first of all, let's just really define what allyship really is. So an ally really is just using whatever privilege you have in a particular moment to liberate someone else from suffering. I have gender privilege. I'm a man. And so there have been plenty of times when I've been in conferences and Zoom calls where I will see some of my female colleagues, maybe someone may overspeak them, interrupt them more often. So it's always best practice to circle back and say, hey, I really like what Sarah was saying. Let's pick up on that point again. That's being an ally in that moment. And so how can we all be allies in our context to the LGBTQ plus community? Let's think about that for a moment. And Sean, I like your answer to the intersectionality, the interconnected nature of multiple identities. That is a perfect answer of it. That's right. And while you all are writing in the chat box with a delay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Remember, I can be out by sharing part of myself. That's right, Michelle. I love that suggestion. When we talk about allyship and sometimes self-advocacy, especially for those of us who are marginalized and advocating for ourselves at the same time, we cannot negate the power of our personal narrative and story. We are with a few very talented and wonderful colleagues at Chat State who will be engaging in a campus initiative soon, where we use the power of our storytelling to open up dialogue, difficult conversations and courageous dialogue, so we can open that space to learn. I can participate, support, express interest. That's right, Reed. These are some good ones. Yes, that's right. Reed, we'll actually get to that in just a few. So it's important, and this is why. According to the most recent 2018 FBI data that we have, gay men were targeted in 60% of anti-LGBTQ plus hate crimes. And when I say plus, that means intersex and asexual. You'll see that a lot. But just think about that. Even this past weekend in New York, there was a hate crime incident where a young man was punched in the middle of the street. We know that 12% of these anti-LGBTQ plus hate crimes targeted lesbians. 1.5% targeted bisexuals, and 1.4% of these crimes targeted heterosexuals. And oftentimes, when people who identify as bisexual or heterosexual are usually with us when we get targeted. So that's how they become victims. Our allies also are on the line. And between 2017 and 2018, anti-transgender violence reported incidents increased 34%. And it's really important here to highlight reported because there are many crimes, hate crimes, anti-gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer crimes that go unreported each year. And they're increasing. And so it's not only that we want allies, we need allies, especially in the workplace. So one good way, and this is to Reed's point about expressing their interest in their LGBTQ plus friends without drawing attention to it. That's such great advice because there are the vast majority of gay, lesbian, and bisexual men and women in the world are in the closet. And in the closet just means that their identity as a sexual minority isn't disclosed. And the closet just isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuum. Me telling you today that I'm gay is coming out of the closet. It does get easier each time, but it's not without risk. We should never encourage everyone to come out the closet where they are. Sometimes, in some particular contexts, it can be dangerous to disclose your sexual identity. So we have to acknowledge that. It requires a certain amount of privilege, to come out the closet and live yourself in an open and free environment. Not everyone has that. Most of the countries where there is an openness tends to be in European countries, with the exception of Eastern Europe. And even then, it really depends mostly how far you are from a major city. We know that most of the homeless youth in this country identify as gay. And so we have to keep that in mind, especially with our students and especially with our employees and faculty and staff. So no matter what our role is, kindness is always the goal. Be kind. I can't tell you how many times I've been in rooms where someone has said something kind to me and asked about my husband. Hey, Quincy, how's Alex doing? Just that acknowledgement, that affirmation is there, lets me know it's okay for me to be myself. I can breathe. I can be my full self in that environment without having to worry about homophobia or a negative reaction. If you have nothing nice to say at all, most of us, I imagine, from the South, keep your mouth shut. It doesn't do anything productive to toxify the atmosphere. So be kind. Inclusion begins with communication. So to Reed's point again, never assume to know someone's identities. You don't, with 83% of sexual minorities hiding in the closet, more than likely, gay people. Now, whether they feel comfortable or not in that particular context or environment, whether they've, reconciled some things with themselves, we just don't know what people are going through. So it's always best practice to not ask about somebody's, personal life if you don't have all the details. And this is not so far stretched. How many times have, women who don't have children are asked about their grandchildren or children, and they have to explain that, maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe they couldn't have children, or maybe they had a child that was lost to death, or something horrible like that. So it's always good to always default to to kind of examining our assumptions. It's also important to use the right words and pronouns referring to someone or describing their gender identity. It doesn't cost you anything, except a little thoughtfulness. If someone wants to, they identify with the they pronouns, just use they pronouns. It's always best practice to default to gender inclusive language like folks, rather than ladies or guys, and to use spouse or partner rather than husband or wife. And this too is it is situational. It depends on the cultural context. There are many of us who grew up in rural environments where ladies and ma'am and sir were just really seen as norms of respect. And so now to unlearn that may take a while, but the goal here is to do that. You're broadening your inclusive muscle. You're being as inclusive as you can. There's nothing wrong with that. The good thing about English is that we do have language that isn't engendered. So spouse is a nice neutral term that doesn't cost you anything to use. And review internal policies and directories for opportunities to be more inclusive, e.g. preferred names. For those documents and directories that are not official, where it's required by the government, where someone has to have their legal birth name, if it's just an internal policy, that could be a lens of equity mindedness with a focus on the transgender community, or even inclusive to our transgender brothers and sisters. We know that nearly all the women, I think, if not, don't quote me on this, not all, of all the trans women murdered last year were Black trans women. So what does that mean? And how do we support those communities? And thank you. And so if you have any questions, I would love to answer them now in the chat. We touched this time whether or not to make gay jokes portray the stereotypes. Yeah, Reed, there's a lot of truth in joking sometimes. And, when you find something funny, that just because it's funny to you doesn't mean that it's funny to everyone. And so we really have to be very aware of how comedy sometimes can reinforce negative stereotypes just by virtue of laughing at other people's pain. That's a very good point. You know what? Thank you for me coming out in that way. Yeah, Danielle, I have been in plenty of contexts where, especially in Prague, Atlanta. I mean, oh my goodness, you got rainbows coming out my eyeballs. But if I'm going to, maybe an unfamiliar context, it may not be safe for me to disclose my sexuality. And with the gay community, especially for gay men, we really, it's always a calculation. Where do we go to eat where we can be ourselves? What bars do we go to that we won't feel harassed? And so when we talk about openness and creative spaces, we want to make sure that if you don't have those issues, if you are an ally, it's important that you vocalize that so that it creates a safe space for all of us. And on another note, it's just good for the bottom line. I mean, if you can have access to more people, to more identities, to more human beings, why wouldn't you? And the easy way to do that is to make them feel welcome. It doesn't cost us anything. It's free. And we'll get more students. It's better for business. And so inclusion really is the way forward. What's the best support presentation? I'm sure. Yes, Michelle. I don't know if this is recorded, but we work together, so I'll just send you the PowerPoint. How do you recommend work with Black students who may film as reporters? Jacqueline, email me, quincy.jenkins@chattanoogastate.edu, and let's talk about it. I have a couple of ideas, but I don't think we have time here necessarily for all of it. One important point to make about the intersectionality of LGBTQ plus identities with an African American experience is that we have to recognize that people are situated within cultures. And so, just because you are a gay African American doesn't make you any less part of African American culture. You just need to know how to navigate that. And what does that mean in that context? And so that requires a certain amount of cultural expertise to do. Obviously, if you are comfortable in navigating African American cultural environments and norms, we know how to marry that with our advocacy for LGBTQ plus allyship. But for those, especially people of color, there tends to be a higher rate of mental illness and mental health concerns from being in the closet, especially in cultures that have high degree of hypermasculinity. But I would love to talk to you about that. Let's talk about ways to navigate conversation at just this online discussion boards. Sure. The good thing about online boards and online settings is that you can do something really cool, which is just tone setting and creating space. That's not as available to us in ephemeral conversations or oral communication, because when you set it, you have to remember it or it's gone. So in online discussion boards, you can state the values up top in written form and kind of just set the tone of the conversations from there on out. It's very fascinating. If you say this space, we are inclusive, we champion all identities, respect is our guiding principle. We are here to learn. You'll see that type of behavior be modeled from your students. It sets the pace. And also, too, you can always reinforce that by commenting and kind of appreciating the comments that champion inclusion. It's a signal, if you will. Thank you, Jacqueline. I look forward to hearing from you. And hey, Sean, how much time do we have left?
So you have about, you have a 15 minutes actually, if you want it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you got
Um,
time.
One of the things I wanted to get from some of you all, what are some initiatives that is going on here in the TBR having to do with inclusion on your own campuses? Oftentimes, I'm pretty sure with all the allies and wonderful people we have out there, you're doing things on campus that no one knows about. And so it may be nice to kind of hear about what you're doing so maybe we can all learn and replicate them on our own campuses. Yeah, Reed, there are a lot of there are a lot of issues with openness, especially around sexual identity in many cultures. And so, and how, it took, I didn't come out the closet until I was 28. And when I did, I kicked that door wide open. But, when for a long time, it took a long time for me to kind of reconcile the things that I was told growing up by people who loved me, people who I loved, and what that meant for me. Talk about trying to pray the gay away. People go through that all the time. But there comes a certain point where the truth is just too bright and you can't run from yourself because wherever you go, there you are. And so a lot of, I was fortunate because I lived next to a bigger city. I had a good understanding family, thank goodness. I wasn't at risk of being homeless. And so I had a lot of things that shielded me from kind of the spiral that would befall a lot of LGBTQ plus people. One important thing to note why I am on it, this past summer, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a 6-2 decision in Boston versus Clayton County that it is now the law of the land that LGBTQ plus employees cannot be fired from the work environment. And so with all the other stuff going on right now in the year 2020, it was kind of lost in kind of the wash. But that was really a watershed moment that now the law of the land moving forward is that you cannot be fired because of your sexual orientation or transgender identity. That is monumental. So not only now will we probably see more of hopefully, more of a will for others to be open with themselves in spaces about their truth. Now you got to work with us because or face lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we still have a long ways to go, obviously, for true equality and inclusion. But this is just where we're headed if we are going to uphold our values of equality. And one more thing, while I'm on it, because I have minutes left, I'm gonna talk through all of them. We it's always good to signal openness as much as you can through maybe stickers matter. I've been on many college campuses, even as an employee, and to see like a safe zone sticker outside of someone's office, it's just like, huh, there's one person I can count on. Because many of us within the LGBTQ plus experience have faced discrimination in ways that's just as impactful, but hard to put our fingers on. Being excluded from different social gatherings, uh, constantly, in my case, being asked when I'm getting a girlfriend, never, and so those type of things are just these constant daily humiliations. And when you add the intersectionality of race in there, and then gender, and then socioeconomic status, I mean, it can get quite complicated. And so it's always good to just signal your welcoming, your allyship, and your warmth. It will mean the world to all of us who have identities that you can't see. I know this is, thank you, Dr. Ashford. Proud to work with you too. I know this is a small thing. Colleagues, colleagues most important means. Yeah, Kara. I mean, that is it's a thing now, and I want to be careful. I don't. If you don't want to put pronouns in your name, if you don't think that is relevant to you, you don't have to do it. It helps just be more inclusive. But should it be a policy that you put pronouns in your signature? Of course not. I think that would probably do more damage, and probably build more resentment against understanding anything. But if you're amenable to it, if you're willing to do it, it will go a long way. Say so on training visa. It's been a great year and let's push into. That's great, Aaron. That's great to hear. With so much going on this year with the COVID-19 crisis, the cries for racial justice in the streets across the country, the economic crisis, and everything else going on. Uh, we need to turn inward and really just be kind to one another. Even if we don't understand, even if we disagree with others, it's always good to sit and just learn, and be patient, because we're all going through this together. So, what does it cost you to make someone else's day just a little brighter? No matter what you think, where you fall. And it's an easy way to really increase employee satisfaction. It's low hanging fruit. All right, if there are no more questions, Sean, I'm pretty sure they've probably heard me yap along here for long enough. So, um, but I am more than happy to sit here and keep taking questions.
All right. Well, Quincy, thank you again for a fantastic presentation today. I learned a lot and today, so I appreciate you for being here. Um, just a reminder to everyone, the sessions are recorded. And so once we end the session, give it a few minutes and it should be there for you to access after our session closes. And we will also have the presentation and slides available on the TBR website after the conference. So again, thank you so much, Quincy, for your time today. And I look forward to virtually seeing you guys this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chisholm.